Welcome to the March 2022 solar performance update of my solar array here in London, UK. Today is the 4th of April 2022 and I've got a lot to discuss, so let's get cracking. The most important thing to mention right now is I have installed the MyEnergi Eddi this month, so we've started to divert some of our solar power to heat our hot water and save a little bit more money that we would otherwise be spending on gas. In addition to that, I finally managed to sign up to Octopus, so our switch of energy provider is in progress and it kicks in during the month of April. So the calculations I'm going to share next month will be very complicated as we switch from the existing tariff to the new British Gas tariff with the revised price cap, and then partway through the month I'm going to switch from that to the Octopus tariff, and then we're going to introduce Octopus Go, which has a separate rate for nighttime energy consumption. So it's going to get very, very complicated. All right. Of course, let's review the disclaimer. So I'm not a qualified professional in anything I'm talking about. I'm just sharing my personal opinion. If you are considering getting solar panels or doing anything that I describe, please make sure you get qualified advice first or use a competent person to do the work for you. If you are interested in switching to Octopus, you can use the link that I've put here on the screen, and I'll put a copy of it in the description, and both you and I will receive £50 off our next bill. Right, I'm going to recap the equipment in the array for any of you who are new. So this is everything that I've got going on. The solar panels on my roof are manufactured by Trina Solar. I've got 19 of those, and each of them can have a theoretical max of 385 watts. My inverter is actually a micro inverter system provided by Enphase. So I have 19 inverters, one behind every single panel up on my roof. And then inside my loft, I have the Enphase Envoy, which is their communication hub. Basically, all the inverters talk to that hub and then transmit the data to the app and then the internet. My battery is produced by Give Energy. So I currently have the Give AC 3.0, so it's a 3 kilowatt inverter which converts the AC back to DC, and then it's stored in this 8.2 kilowatt battery. I have chosen to go with Hypervolt for my EV charger, so I've got 2 of them on the outside of my house. We've got an Audi Q4 e-tron in the family and another electric vehicle on order, and as I've said, we've introduced the MyEnergi Eddi solar power diverter. And in addition to that, I've signed up to Octopus Go, so it's kind of partly greyed out because it hasn't kicked in yet, but those are the rates that I expect to have when it kicks in about a week's time from now. So just to talk a little bit about the MyEnergi setup before I get into all of this month's analytics. So to get the Eddi going, I needed the hub and the Harvey as well. So let me explain what they are. The hub is the communications hub. If you want to monitor what the Eddi is doing remotely via the MyEnergi app, you need the hub. The hub is mains powered and it must be hardwired to your internet. So it needs to have a wired connection going to your router, or if you have any repeaters around the house, hardwired into that. Otherwise it won't work. It's not essential to have this as part of your system, but it does mean if you don't have it, you can't use the app. You can only look at the Eddi and kind of extract information from the screen on it, but not remotely. Then I've got the Harvey. So again, this is an optional device. What it does is it takes the data that the CT clamp is providing and wirelessly transmits it to your Eddi or to your Zappi if you had the EV charger from the MyEnergi brand. In my case, this was needed because my main supply comes in under the stairs and the Eddi is located next to the water tank, which is in an upstairs bedroom. We've got wooden floors throughout the house, so it wasn't feasible to find a route to run a cable from our understairs cupboard all the way up to where the water tank is. So instead I used the Harvey. Now the Harvey harvests its energy from the CT clamp, so it doesn't need any power at all. You simply attach the CT clamp to your mains live cable, put the other end in the Harvey, and that's it. It comes to life by itself and transmits. And when I plugged it all in, it just worked. I didn't have any issues where it was out of range or was sending dodgy data. Finally, then there's the main device that we wanted, which is the MyEnergi Eddi. Now, you could install this by itself without the other two things, right? You don't need the hub, that's just optional. And the Harvey, you don't need if you can find a way to hardwire the Eddi to the CT clamp, which needs to go around your main supply. So if your water tank is, or wherever you choose to locate the Eddi, is in such a position that it's close to your main supply, or you can get a cable there, then brilliant, that's all you need. Now, most people use the Eddi to divert excess green energy, solar power, wind power to heat your hot water, rather than sending this surplus back to the grid. But the Eddi can do much more than just hot water. You can use it to heat towel rails. You can use it to kind of turn on your underfloor heating. If you have a heat pump, you can use it to divert power to your heat pump. And there's many more things in the instructions. I think there are about 15 different things you could connect it up to. The Eddi has also got two outputs. So what I mean by that is it can control two devices. So in my case, I actually have two water tanks in the house, and therefore I've got two immersion heaters. So I've connected one of the outputs to the first tank and the second output to the immersion heater in the second tank. So I can actually heat both separate tanks of water via the system. The Eddi can only heat or power one device at a time, but in the settings you can tell it what priority you want it to give and how frequently you should check back with the other device just to keep them both under control. But anyway, the long and the short of this is the excess power that I was diverting to the grid and given away for free earlier in March is now being put to good use to heat my hot water and reduce the gas bill. Okay, I'm probably going to make a separate video to show you how to install the Eddi, the Harvey and the hub. It's actually really easy. The majority of my time was spent kind of figuring out how to run the wire neatly, which needs to power the Eddi without having it surface mounted, and also the wire which needed to go to the second water tank. We had a bit of a difficult route to run it round. That's where we spent most of our time. But actually fixing the Eddi to the wall and connecting up the wires is a piece of cake. My advice, if you want to do this, make sure you get a qualified electrician to do it for you. But I'm going to take you through the journey and show you actually how easy it was for me to do myself. All right, let's move on and get into the performance for the month of March. So usually on the top left, I have a chart which comes from British Gas, which shows how much power, how much electricity I purchase from them every day. If you recall last month, that chart was broken, only half the data was there. And when I looked at the portal a couple of days ago, it's still broken. I don't have any data at all for the month of March. So thanks very much, British Gas, and I'm very pleased to be leaving and moving across to Octopus, who are much better. Just to give you some highlights before I talk about each chart individually. So the best day in the month of March was the 26th of March. We accomplished the entire day without drawing power to the grid. Without drawing power from the grid. In general, on the good days, the battery that we've got was filling up by noon. And then earlier in March, before I installed the Eddi, we were diverting the surplus power to the grid and giving it away for free. But then once I installed the Eddi, most of that surplus power in the afternoon was going into the hot water, and then very little at the end of the day was going back to the grid. So at the moment, it's a good balance, but I can see as we get into the even sunnier days in the next few months that I'm still going to have surplus power left. So I haven't given up on the idea I mentioned last month of getting an additional battery. I'm getting quotes and shopping around, but at the moment, everything Give Energy appears to be out of stock because with the price rises in the UK, it seems literally everybody is getting solar, so they've sold out. All right, so let's look at the charts. I'm going to start with the one on the top right. The bottom line here is that we imported 216 kilowatts from the grid. Our solar array produced 483 kilowatts. We exported 63 kilowatts to the grid. So this is the surplus power that we had no way of consuming, so it went back to the grid. And the net of all of that means our house consumed 636 kilowatts during the month. So that's so regardless of where it came from, the house used up 636 kilowatts. if you look at the month overall, it means 66% of all of our electricity consumption was free. We got it from our solar power. The rest of it we drew from the grid. Looking at the actual chart, you can see on the chart at the beginning of March, the blue segments in the bar were relatively small. We were drawing power from the grid, and it's because it wasn't very sunny. As we got into like the 6th or the 7th of March, we started to get sunnier days, and you can see the blue portion of the bar is the majority of that kind of bar above the zero line. There's very little grey. And as we get from about the 20th to the 26th of the month, you can see that the blue segment is growing and growing and growing. And we got to the point where there's hardly any grey on the top of that blue bar. That's indicating that all of our power is coming from solar production and we're not having to draw anything from the grid. Now, I would say that 26th of March was a perfect day, and although the chart below says that we were 99% independent, I would call that 100%, because if you look very carefully at the chart, overnight there's very, very small bars, and this is just kind of noise as the battery kind of ramps up and ramps down. It can't react quickly enough to the demand that the house is asking for, and so it pulls a tiny amount from the grid. I'll be surprised if we see 100% day, but we never know. We're going to try again and see if we can accomplish that during the month of April. So next I want to talk about the two charts on the bottom. So starting with the one on the left, the one which says the 19th of March. So this was a pretty good day. You can see that we didn't draw any power from the grid until just before 3 a.m. So that means that the battery had been charged up the day before, and it got us until about 3 a.m. before it was depleted. And then we started pulling power from the grid for whatever power our house consumes overnight. From about 6 a.m. the sun's shining, so we have a perfect day here with no clouds or anything. So we've got a nice curve on our solar array over there. And then it tails off at around 5 p.m. It looks like at around 7 p.m. we probably turned on the oven or something, and the kettle or washing machine at the same time. So we had a bit of a spike where the battery couldn't provide enough power. Our battery can only discharge at 3 kilowatts. So if the house is demanding more than that, so if you've got the oven on and the kettle, or 2 ovens on, something like that, you're going to be asking for more than 3 kilowatts at a moment. And so in our case, we must have been doing that, and the extra was being requested from the grid. So that's why you see a spike there on those couple of segments. And then for the rest of the night, we didn't draw anything else from the grid because the battery was providing it. Still looking at that same chart for the 19th of March, if you look on the bottom half, we've got orange bars up until about noon. So what that's saying is that we are charging our battery. All the solar that's being produced is being consumed, as in it's going into the battery. But then once we get to about noon, the battery's full. And this is before I'd installed the Eddi, that we've got nothing left to do but export this surplus. So you can see below the line, those orange bars suddenly shrink and it's replaced by grey segments. That means that we are exporting to the grid for the rest of the day. So as you can see, like I said earlier on, we're wasting half the surplus on the 19th of March. It's all going to the grid and we're giving it away. And that across the month of March added up to 63 kilowatts. Now, if you look at the chart on the bottom right, so again, the 26th of March was a perfect day. The day before we actually charged up our battery, didn't use as much power overnight, and the battery made it all the way through the night. So we didn't draw anything from the grid at all. And then as soon as the sun started to come up at around 6 o'clock, the house was producing enough power to get us through the day again without drawing power from the grid. Now, if you look carefully on this one, on the 26th of March, I had already installed the Eddi. So you can see from about 12 noon or slightly after that on the orange segment below the line, you can see tiny little grey bits on the bottom of the bar. So the way I've set up the Eddi is to wait for a small amount of surplus to be exporting before it starts to divert power to the Eddi. So before it starts to divert power to the immersion heaters. So the reason I set it up like this is to be sure that we're actually generating a surplus rather than it's just noise as different things turn on and off in the house and there's a bit of a fluctuation. So whilst the Eddi is diverting, at the moment I've got it set up to allow a tiny amount to be exported to the grid, and if there's more surplus than that tiny amount, then the Eddi kicks in and starts doing its thing. But you can basically see what I'm saying here is from, sometime after 12 p.m, maybe around 1:30, we are diverting the surplus power on this day into the eddy to heat the hot water, and we've got 2 tanks to warm up, and we got to the end of the day where I think the eddy was still trying to divert power. Those 2 tanks hadn't got to temperature, and then we ran out of power for the day. And then from about 6 p.m. again, the eddy stops diverting, the solar stops producing, and the battery kicks in, and the battery lasts us all night without having to draw any power from the grid. So 26th March was our best day. Not only is it the most perfect curve with no clouds in sight, we also produced the most amount of solar power in a day so far. So we got to 26.9 something kilowatts, which is really, really good. And finally, looking at the chart on the top left, so this is the summary of the solar production per panel for the entire month of March. So as I said before, we've produced 483 kilowatts, and you can see that it's still the panels on the front of our house which are producing the most amount of power. The panels on the back are definitely coming to life now that the sun's higher in the sky and further around, and they're generating a lot more than in the previous months. If you go back and look at previous videos, you can see that those panels didn't really do much. It was all about the front, but now those rear panels are really adding to the equation and helping in the afternoons to catch a little bit more sunlight. Okay, so that's everything there is to say over here. One more thing to add is, I don't know why, but on the 16th of March, the fuse that we have, which is between the Give Energy inverter and the Give Energy battery, tripped for some reason. So although there was some charge in the battery, it was not discharging, and then the following day when the sun kicked in, it wasn't charging. So I had to call Give Energy on the Friday to say, what's going on? And that's when they told me that the inverter's got power, but the battery hasn't. So it's most likely that fuse, which is between the inverter and the battery. Can I go and check it? So upon checking it, it was switched, it had tripped and it was off. As soon as we turned it back on, everything came back to life. So it does mean that on a nice sunny day, we did lose some efficiency there, where the battery could have been providing power during the night and could have been charging up the following morning before I called them and found out what the problem was. The thing is, Give Energy don't share this information with you like through the apps. I know what's going on, but they have all the information on their end, so it forces me to make a phone call to them for them to tell me, right, they can see the inverter's got power, but the battery hasn't, therefore it's the fuse between the two. Whereas if they'd said to me, both the inverter and the battery don't have power, then they also know it's the fuse at the main fuse box that we've got. So, I wish in the app they could enhance it to kind of bring this information to go, look, the status of the inverter's online, offline, whatever. So it helps me troubleshoot by myself, because I could have, figured this out in an evening, perhaps if I'd browsed through the app and gone, okay, the app's reporting there's problems, rather than having to kind of wait and see if it comes to life. And when it doesn't, then I think I spent 20 minutes on hold to Give Energy before they finally answered the phone. Anyway, let's move on. So bottom line here is the month of March was a really good day. We had 3 or 4 days where we were at like 98, 99% efficient, as in all the power is being produced by the solar power. We're charging up the battery enough to last us through the night. So that's really, really fantastic. And it's really helped to put up our overall independence number, because we were at about 43% in the month of February. So we've jumped all the way up to 66%. So really, really good over there. We've hit a small milestone of just over 50 subscribers this month. So if you are finding these videos helpful and informative, do me a favour and hit that like button and subscribe. That way you can get notified when I release a new video, and it helps YouTube's algorithm get this video in front of other people. At the moment, the demand for solar power and battery storage is going through the roof. A lot of installers are saying that they're running out of stock and they're getting booked up months and months in advance. So there's a lot of people looking into this. And again, it would help me if you hit that like and subscribe button, which will enable YouTube to put this video out in front of other people as well. Let's move on then and look at our household electricity consumption. So this is the chart that you're familiar with. I've made it more complicated now because we've got the eddy in the equation as well. So basically, net, we consumed 373 kilowatts of power to run the kind of main portion of our house. In addition, some of the green power was used to go into the Eddi, so 42 kilowatts went into the Eddi, and then there's a tiny sliver on that final chart at the very top. We put 5 kilowatts into the car. So that combined adds up to the 483 kilowatts produced on the previous slide, minus the 63 kilowatts that we exported to the grid. So net 420 kilowatts of solar power was consumed in the house. And if you add up 373, 42 and 5, that should also be 420 kilowatts. And at the bottom now you see that for the month of March we had exported 63 kilowatts. So I installed the Eddi on the 21st of March. So for the first 3 weeks all the surplus was being exported, and then for the last kind of portion of March the surplus was going into the Eddi. What we realised in doing this is that one of our immersion heaters, although it works, the thermostat is broken, so it never switches off. So what I did is I adjusted the priority. So first of all, the Eddi warms up the water in the other tank where the immersion heater and the thermostat work properly. When that thing reports that the water's at temperature, it sends the energy to the other tank where the thermostat's broken. And in that light, the Eddi just keeps on warming up that water forever because it's not able to tell the Eddi that it's reached temperature. So we're having to call a plumber to try and get the thermostat replaced. But in the meantime, the way we're doing it is that tank is very close to my office. So when it gets to temperature, I can hear it sizzling and bubbling. And then I manually go into the app and switch it off. Most of the time, we don't quite get there, or at least I don't think it's at temperature. So basically the whole day goes by where the Eddi is warming that tank up in the afternoon, and then the sun goes down. So that's where we are at the moment. I'm expecting in the month of April we will have less solar power diverted to the grid because the Eddi will be consuming it. But let's see what happens. I should also say that we still haven't got the Smart Export Guarantee activated. It's been over a month now since I submitted the paperwork to Octopus. I've called them twice to chase it up, and they say they are waiting for a export meter number to be provided from our DNO. They're also finding it very difficult to kind of get anything done for whatever reason. So once our incoming energy is switched to Octopus as well, then the whole ecosystem will be with Octopus, and I'll be better able to kind of chase them up and get this activated. But as it stands, whatever we export to the grid, we're giving away for free. We're not making any money on it. And finally, let's look at the solar payback curve. So again, the chart's not very exciting. I might kind of find a new way to do this in the future, but let's talk about the numbers here. So installing the Eddi has driven our overall capex cost up. It cost about £600, just under £600 to get the Eddi and the Harvey and the hub and a few bits of wire and isolators and whatever to get that installed. So that takes our capex to just over £18,000. Our lifetime solar savings are now £215. So we saved roughly £90 on electricity that we would have otherwise purchased from the grid. We still haven't charged our car. We're not using it enough. Basically, we're still kind of using the other petrol-powered car that we've got because it's a lot smaller and easier to park in different places in London. So we need to do a better job in using the electric car so that we can take advantage of these savings. So there's no diesel cost there to offset yet. I've added a new box in to capture the efficiency from the Eddi. So we diverted 42 kilowatts into the Eddi, and that comes to £1.70. EV charging has stayed the same because we haven't charged the car. I said that we put 5 kilowatts into the car on the previous slide, which is true. So we did have some of our household energy go into a car, but that car wasn't our own. So although we've charged a car and it's used up some of the power, we haven't generated an efficiency from a monetary point of view because it was a family member's car. So I'm not including that as an update here. So if you add up all those numbers, the total OPEX savings are currently £238.09. And if you subtract that number from the CAPEX, that leaves a balance of £17,781 until we break even. The £238 is 1.32% of the overall CAPEX. And we've now had the solar installed for just short of 5 months. And the forecasted payback on a linear curve is 30 years, just over 30 years. So on the last month when I reported this, our payback was at 37 years. So the savings that we've made during the month of March has locked 7 years off our payback. Now it might seem a long way out, but remember what I've been saying. This is linear, and we started by the worst possible months. We've gone straight through the winter where we're making the weakest savings, and that's currently in the formula. So I would say, we need to let 12 months go by before that forecast number is reasonably accurate. We can start to get a good idea of how long it will take. There's two things which are really going to influence it. One, we really need to start using the electric car more rather than the petrol one. And two, we need to find more ways to consume the excess solar so that we are giving away or diverting to the grid the least amount we possibly can. So I'm fully expecting that number to come down. As we go into the month of April, our energy price has gone from about 20 pence per kilowatt to 30 pence per kilowatt. And then I plan to switch to the Octopus Go tariff, which is actually 32 pence per kilowatt in peak time, but it's 7.5 off peak. So I did the maths based on how much I consume off peak. The savings that I make there will offset the peak time consumption of having to pay 2p more than the kind of cap rate. And given that during peak time a lot of our power is being produced for free, then it's going to make more financial sense in my mind as we do that. Okay, so looking at the numbers over here, the nice £2 was saved by producing 420 kilowatts and consuming it. Remember, we produced 480, but we gave 60 kilowatts to the grid for free. So the actual saving that we've made is based on the 420 kilowatts that we consumed. That takes the lifetime pot of solar savings to £214. I spoke about the Eddi, £1.70. The reason it's so low is because the 42 kilowatts of free solar going into the hot water is actually saving us gas, because our hot water is otherwise heated by gas, and we currently pay just short of 4p per kilowatt for gas. So 42 kilowatts times whatever it is, 4p, arrives at £1.70. The fuel costs stay the same, the lifetime fuel stays the same, and the total cost then is £238.09. I have made a correction to all of these numbers, so those of you who are eagle-eyed may notice last month that some of these numbers are ever so slightly different. The reason being is that the unit prices quoted for energy are before VAT. Now, in my mind, VAT is mandatory. I have to pay it. It's money that's coming out of my pocket. And if I buy a unit of energy from the grid, they're going to charge me VAT on this, right? So if I'm saving it, if I'm producing solar power, not only am I saving the unit price, I'm saving the VAT. So in my payback calculation, I want to include that. So I had omitted that in all of my previous calculations. I had been quoting the energy unit price before tax. And so what I've done is I've taken the before tax price and I've added the VAT on. And the numbers you see here that I'm quoting for unit prices, so the 0.21915 for electricity and the 0.0406 for gas, that number now includes 5% VAT. Okay, and so there's some changes in the calculation for solar. There's some small changes on the cost of charging the EV car, etc., etc. But hopefully that calculation is going to be right going forward. But okay, this is where we are for the month of March. So I'm particularly pleased. We've produced a lot of power that we don't have to buy from the grid. That's a massive thing for us, given that they've just hiked the price from 20p a unit to 30p a unit. And I'm glad that we've got the MyEnergi in the equation. I'm glad that I've managed to switch to Octopus, and the tariff for electricity will be fixed for a year. Gas was still on variable. Their fixed tariff was so much more that it's not worth it at the moment. So all that leaves me to do is a complicated calculation when I produce next month's summary, and I still need to figure out how to get an extra battery into the equation. So that will then end up driving the capex cost way above 20,000, maybe 21, possibly 22 if we kind of want to spend close to £4,000 on it. But we're still shopping around for the moment, and what we could do is start using the battery in the car as a buffer. The 3 or 4 kilowatts that we end up with as surplus after heating the hot water that ends up going to the grid, we could trickle charge the car. We haven't been doing that yet, but that's a new habit that we could get into. Okay, so I hope you found this video useful. Please like and subscribe. I see that we've had a lot of subscribers during this month, so that's it's really good to hear that this video is interesting. If you do have questions, something that I haven't covered in this explanation, please feel free to drop it in the comments and I'll be happy to try and answer those for you. And as I said earlier on, I will most probably make a separate video just to show you how to install the MyEnergi Eddi. It's really quite simple. So if you are competent and you're going to do this yourself, then I can show you how it works. But remember my advice in the disclaimer, I'm not a qualified professional and you should get a qualified person to do these things for you.